Hi, I'm Nicola, and the topic of this course is the NetServer's account provider. The account provider allows NetServer to manage users and groups that are essential to the authentication and authorization for various services. NetServer Enterprise supports authentications and authorization against either a local or a remote account provider. Supported provider types are local open LDAP running on the NetServer Enterprise itself, remote LDAP server with RFC 2307 schema, local Samba 4 Active Directory domain controller, or remote Active Directory. Both Microsoft and Samba implementation are supported. Besides choosing to bind to a remote provider or install a local one, administrator has to decide which backend type suits his needs. For example, the file server application of NetServer Enterprise, which enables the shared folder, can authenticate SMB CIFS client only if NetServer Enterprise is bound to an Active Directory. The LDAP providers allow access to shared folder only in guest mode. On the other hand, the local Open LDAP provider is easier to install and configure. In short, if SMB file sharing protocol support is not required, an LDAP provider is the best choice. NetServer Enterprise can be bound to a remote Active Directory account provider that can be provided by either Samba or Microsoft implementations. In this scenario, NetServer Enterprise becomes a trusted server of an existing Active Directory domain. When accessing a NetServer Enterprise resource from domain workstation, user credentials are checked against one of the domain controllers, and access to the resource is granted. Joining an Active Directory domain has the following prerequisite. The Kerberos protocol requires the time difference between systems clocks in the network is less than 5 minutes, so it's mandatory to configure both NetServer and network clients to align their clocks to a common time source. After the prerequisite is fulfilled, proceed to the UI page Users and Groups, configure the account provider, Active Directory, join existing domain controller. Enter here the domain name of the AD domain and then press check button. If required, fill the AD DNS server field. Usually, it is an IP address of an AD domain controller. Then press check again. If the data is correct, the next button will activate. Some useful hints. Use the Active Directory domain for the NetServer FQDN itself, and use the IP address of the Active Directory domain controller as the unique DNS server for NetServer. Then provide the username and password of an AD account with the privilege of joining a computer to the domain. In this phase, remember that the default administrator account could be disabled. If credentials are valid, complete the procedure by pressing Next. Once the procedure has been finalized, you'll see the read-only list of the AD users and groups. To be fully operational, some additional applications, such as Nextcloud, WebTop, Roundcube, eJabber, or NetVoice, require a dedicated read-only user account to perform simple LDAP binds. Create a dedicated user account in the remote AD or LDAP provider. Then set a complex, non-expiring password for it. If the remote provider is another NetServer Enterprise, it already provides the user LDAP service for this purpose. Once NetServer Enterprise is successfully bound to the remote AD, specify the dedicated user account credential in Users and Groups, Account Provider, Add Provider, Authentication Credential for LDAP Application panel. To install and configure an Open LDAP local account provider, go to page Users and Groups, configure the account provider, LDAP, install local LDAP. To successfully complete the procedure, the system needs a working internet connection and must be able to correctly resolve public DNS name to download additional packages. At the end of the installation, the package is automatically configured, and the administrator will be able to manage users and groups for the Users and Groups page. When installing Samba Active Directory as a local account provider, the system needs an additional IP address. The additional IP is assigned to a Linux container that runs the Active Directory domain controller role and must be accessible from the LAN, the green network. So the additional IP address must satisfy three conditions. The IP address has to be available and it must not be used by any other machine or device. The IP address has to be in the same subnet range of a green network, and the chosen green network has to be bound to a bridge interface where the Linux container can attach its virtual interface. The installation procedure can create the bridge interface automatically if it is missing. To successfully complete the procedure, the system needs a working internet connection and must be able to correctly resolve the DNS public names to download additional packages. Samba Active Directory runs inside a Linux container which uses a virtual network interface bridged to a network interface of the system. The virtual network interface has to be visible inside the physical network, but often virtualization solutions block ARP traffic. As a result, the Samba Active Directory container is not visible by LAN hosts. When installing in a virtual environment, make sure the virtualization solution allows traffic in promiscuous mode. To install a local Active Directory account provider, go to page Users and Groups, configure the account provider, Active Directory, create a domain, and become DC. The procedure will ask to provide some information about the domain we are creating. The domain name that defines the DNS suffix of the new domain, for which NetServer Enterprise acts as an authoritative DNS server. The NetBIOS domain name, also known as domain short name or NT domain name, that is the alternative Active Directory domain identifier that is compatible with older clients, and the DCIP address field that must be filled with the additional IP address explained before. When all fields are filled in, press the Create Domain button. The Active Directory configuration procedure might require some time to run. It creates the bridge interface, if needed, and the Linux container by downloading additional packages. At the end of the procedure, the NetServer Enterprise host machine automatically joins the new Active Directory domain. It's important to point out that the Active Directory domain name and NetBIOS domain name values cannot be changed once the domain has been created. After installing Samba Active Directory, the Users and Group page has two default entries, both disabled, Administrator and Admin. Administrator is the default Active Directory privileged account and is not required by NetServer Enterprise, so it is safe to keep it disabled. Admin is defined by NetServer Enterprise as the built-in system administrator account, and it is member of AD Domain Admins Group. It is important to point out that the use of the local Samba AD account provider allows sysadmin to implement a complete Microsoft Active Directory replacement. The client PCs can be joined to the domain as it happens for a classic Microsoft DC, and it's possible to administer the policies for all objects in the domain through appropriate GPOs through the standard RSAT tools. Additionally, it is possible to interface other net servers with the same user base, simply joining them to the domain. For example, you can join a NetSecurity instance to the domain to utilize its user for VPN or web proxy authentication, or you can join a server instance running Nextcloud to utilize the same user base also for personal cloud service. If needed, the configured account provider can be removed only by root account from User and Groups, Account Provider, Change Provider panel. When the account provider has been removed, existing files owned by User and Groups, like Home directories, emails, file in the share folders, or Nextcloud profiles must be removed manually. Additionally, in case of local account provider, any user, groups, or computer account is erased. A list of user and groups in a tab-separated values format is dumped to ease subsequent bulk import. Since the system cannot read the user's password, a new random password will be assigned to every user during import. Thanks for watching.